negotiating athlete, coaching, and endorsement agreements. Two people on this panel. One of them is the moderator. We're both in the previous panel. That's Brian and Kevin. Darren Ferris on the end is the managing director and certified NHLPA agent at Quartexx Management. Neil Glasberg is the president and chief executive officer of PBI Sports and the coaches agency. And Gil Scott, a certified NFL agent and president of Gil Scott Sports Management. So Brian, take it away.
Okay, I'm not going to make everyone get up and stretch like, who made everyone get up and stretch? Tom Wright. So I'm not going to make you get up and stretch, but bear with us here. We're down to the last two panels, and the way we set this up is try and focus the second day more on the player-team relationship. So that we're going to focus today on the last panel here, for me anyway, is negotiating contracts. So we agreed, we typically do a conference call among the panelists. We did it by email this time. So we've agreed on an order. We're going to go about athletes first, okay? So the topics are athletes and whatever. We're going to start with the athletes. So, Kevin, you start off. You've negotiated a lot of contracts on behalf of the team. What's your strategy? What are your technique? What's your whole plans going in?
Like any negotiation, you want to prepare. It's probably the most important thing you can do. And then I'll spend a lot of time with my boss, who'll give me the thumbs up to begin a negotiation. We'll talk to the player, make sure that, particularly if it's in season, that he's comfortable with us beginning a negotiation while he's playing. And then I'll spend time with our personnel departments, coming up with comparables around the league, players at that position at a similar point in their career that have signed recent extensions, get a sense of where our player fits market value-wise. And when we begin talking to the agent, it's a fine line. You kind of want to save yourself some room to move. But we also, especially with our own players, we want to make sure they recognize that we're making serious offers right from the beginning. So we don't leave a lot of room to move, which at times can frustrate agents. But we also feel like if we were to lowball on our initial offer, it's really no different than lying to our player. And we value the player-team relationship too much to start off a negotiation with what really isn't a genuine offer to begin with. So. We try and be as transparent about that with the agents as possible, understanding that they, from their point of view, there really are three sides to a negotiation. The agent has to feel like it's a deal that represents him or her and his or her firm as well. They have to recruit off of these deals, so we try to be sensitive to it. It's not a priority for us in a negotiation, but we're certainly aware that it's one of the variables that has to be considered at least before you're going to get the deal done.
And before I ask you, Darren, I'm going to piggyback on that. We always felt on all my teams that the first offer had to be right, because you're not going to get a deal done if the first offer's not right. You have no chance. It goes from whatever chance you had to zero. It offends the player, pisses off the agent. So we almost treat it like an arbitration case. We ran, like you say, Kevin, comparables, and then we came in with an offer that we could support, maybe a little wiggle room so the agent can justify his fee, but we didn't move much. We didn't move much off that first offer. We did all our homework on the first offer, and then unless the market moved, we didn't move. The market moves on you sometimes. You have 2 or 3 signings in between, and now you got to move because the comparables you used are no longer comparable. But anyway, Darren.
Yeah, in our case, we always do as you said, a preliminary research and statistics and analytics with our group. I always prepare.
Talking to the mic, please.
Oh, sorry. Always prepare for negotiations that way, in analyzing the situation, who you're dealing with. Everyone has a different style of negotiate. As you said, some will come with usually their best offer. Some won't, and we take the marketplace into consideration as well as probably the team marketplace as well, as far as their cap space, expiring contracts, and also how much leverage you might have with that particular player and that team. So, and then at that point, we would go to the player and present the scenarios, positive, negative, and what outcomes could come from it, and usually from there we're discussing with the team.
And if you counter, Darren, do you usually counter with different terms? Like, in other words, say, here's what we do on a 3-year deal, here's what we do on a 4-year deal?
If that's what we're looking for, of course, every player is different, so some you may want a longer term and the player may want a longer term. Some may want the shorter term so that they can take advantage of their getting closer to free agency, as an example.
And again, contrast styles. We never moved off our initial term until we had to. We offered a 4-year deal. It's a 4-year deal, and that's all we're going to talk about till hell freezes over. So we weren't very good with you guys. Gil?
I think, first of all, you got to have a great conversation with your client, especially if he's approaching free agency. And so I represent coaches in the National Hockey League and general managers, and I do football players in the NFL. So when it's a football player in the NFL, if he's going to be a free agent, and I'm dealing with someone like Kevin, one of my first calls to my player would be, well, how do you like playing for that particular club? How do you like the coach you're playing for? You're going to have options in free agency. Is this a tax-free state you're living in, or could you go to a Florida team or a Vegas team or Seattle, or where it's a tax-free state, or Texas? Those numbers make a difference in his net income. So a lot of it's got to be what your player wants to accomplish, and then obviously we look at the comparables, who we feel are comparable players, and try and find the best deals we can to use those as our leverage. And Kevin typically might try and find maybe some easier deals, right, as a comparable in that first offer. I have done some deals with Kevin, and he's very good to work with, so that's not a problem. But
That means
there are
no
teams.
pushover.
Yeah, no, not at all. There are teams that will lowball you off the stump right away. That's just their practice. And so then I hate doing this, but I typically have to go significantly higher, because you're going to merge at some point, and if they're going to play that game, I've got to play it on the top end. Well, I'd rather deal with something like Kevin, where you just pretty much go straight to the point quickly, but it doesn't always happen that way with every team and situation you're dealing with.
So we got a young group, Gil. Can you name a couple of your clients for us that you represent, or would you rather not? I know, Darren, you did a big deal last summer. Well,
Yeah. I just did a deal. This was an interesting deal. You'll find this interesting. I represent the Pro Bowl punter on the Tennessee Titans, Brett Kern, and we were at the Combine in Indianapolis, and I was in a room with the general manager and the contract negotiator, a guy named Vin Marino, and it's the first time I've ever seen a general manager use a hotel mirror as an easel. So John Robinson got this big mirror, and we put up all the numbers on the board and all the comparables, my side, his side, and we basically kind of, after a couple hours of conversation, split it down the middle and got a deal done in a hotel room on a mirror. I actually took a picture of that with my phone, because it's the first time I'd ever done a deal on a mirror with
I
instead
have
of an
to
easel.
admit, you got me beat. I never did that.
Yeah.
Darren, you had an interesting. Who was your client this summer? One of your big clients?
Mitch Marner, yep,
Mitch Marner. That was a 6-year deal
6-year deal.
and a pretty good dough. How's he
Yeah.
coming along with his injury?
And he's doing fine. Yeah, he'll
Okay.
be, they put him on LTIR, so he has to be out the 10 games in
10 games in 24 days?
24 days,
Yeah.
and then should be back and ready to go.
Well, I hope he gets back quick.
Yeah.
They need him, and he's a pretty important player. Okay, so that's athletes. Neil, talk about coaches. Gil does coaches as well, but we'll have you start it off.
Sure. First of all, Darren Ferris is sponsoring the bar tonight. Now that he's
Nice
landed
try.
this big Marner kick-ass deal. Unlike us, Gil and I, on the coaching side, who slave away. A very significant difference, as Brian said. I work with coaches and assistant general managers and general managers predominantly in the NHL, but I also work with coaches in the NFL. So I don't spend a lot of time in hockey arenas watching the next 12-year-old up-and-comer, which is just fine with me. The challenge on the coaching side.
Neil, move that mic over just a wee bit, please.
Okay, better?
Yeah.
The challenge on the coaching side is that because coaches are not part of any collectively bargained agreement, the data and the comparables is secretive, and are supposed to be secretive. General managers are very effective at getting information from other general managers, but I think, and Gil would probably agree, that the advantage that we have is that we generally have a lot more information than a general manager would have. Which really helps on the credibility front. I mean, if you lie, you get caught. But if you have the data points, it helps in terms of the discussion. The one thing that is different, not to go against what Brian said, but the success, or I guess the experiences that I have had in negotiating coaches' contracts often come down to term. where a team will offer a certain term of 3 years or whatnot, and I can confidently say in almost 100% of the cases I've managed to extend the term on the deal. But keep in mind, we're talking about players versus 31 NHL head coaching jobs that don't generally turn over that often. But not unlike what Darren does or what any NHLPA agent does, I find that in the coaching space, it really is a negotiation. It's not because the data points aren't public, and the general managers are willing to listen to the approach. And my approach, just real quick, is that I business case every one of my clients. So it's very hard. I mitigate any kind of pushback from a GM because I have all the data points and I have all the reasons why my client is justified at whatever I'm asking for.
Yeah, and see, what I would do there is I would suspend the negotiation. I'd say, I'm going to check your data points, and I'd call those teams, and then it's okay. We're talking the same language at least. I would never be in an inferior position knowledge-wise.
And it never gets to that point, Burke. It really doesn't. And from my standpoint, I don't have a problem sharing. It's easy, and this is one of the value adds of why coaches now, well, the NFL and the NBA, coaches and GMs have had representation for north of 20 years. Hockey is still new. Gil was the pioneer in terms of working with coaches and GMs years before I got started. But for the most part, the negotiation is quite fluid, and because there are professionals that now do this for a living, such as the two of us up here, it's kind of tough to. It's not an argumentative exercise.
And I would be more willing to give you a year if the guy was a good coach, because he's going to get rehired. That's the one thing. When you give a coach a 4-year deal and you fire him 2 years in, you're probably not eating the last 2 years of that deal. They've all got set-off clauses in them. So if he gets hired elsewhere, the team that hires him has to pay him a representative salary. They can't pay him $1, and whatever they pay him comes off what you owe him. So yeah, I would be much more prone to give an extra year on a coach than I would on a player. When we went on players, we came in at the term and it was like, someone's going to have to kill me to get me off this number, the term. So, okay, endorsements. So we talked athletes, we talked coaches, let's talk endorsements. First off, my experience has been whatever you hear a player makes in endorsements, divide it by 2. It's all bullshit. Oh, what's your viewpoint, Darren?
It depends who you are. Yeah, I mean, there are deals out there.
So you got. Let me interrupt you. You got Mitch into I see him. He's doing a bunch of stuff. He's doing Apple.
Apple. He's got Red Bull, Apple Beats, Red Bull, Intact Insurance. I mean, Toronto's a big market, so
Yeah.
You're going to get.
He's really good on screen.
Yes.
He's really a believable guy.
Yeah, and he's done. He did some stuff with American Express. He has some good quality endorsers. Sorry.
Now, and that fight, is that typically over dollars and term?
Yeah, both.
Automatic
And,
renewals?
I mean, we try to, do little work for lots of pay type of theory, so that it doesn't.
He's not shooting commercials for 4
during-
days.
Correct, and and while the team's playing, and you try to keep it as little labor intensive as you can, so that you're not. Now, if you're in a smaller market, sometimes you're going to have to do more. If you're in Arizona or something, those are usually hard to come by. So.
Now, what type of restrictions do you have from the team? Like, use of the logo?
Yeah, there's boundaries. I mean, if you're using a team sponsor, you can only do, I forget what the radius is. It's something like 50 mile. They can't go outside of that. They can't use the logo of that. Example, Red Bull. If anything is advertised outside the 50-mile radius of Toronto, they can't use their logo because they're not an NHL sponsor.
So there's restrictions, league restrictions?
Correct.
Team restrictions? Morals clauses typically in these?
Yeah, those are quite extensive, yeah.
So please explain to the young folks here
So,
how this works.
I mean, they can easily, a sponsor, if someone gets into trouble off the ice or anything that's seen detrimental to the brand, it's pretty extensive for the corporate side to be able to cancel a contract or
So-
an endorsement agreement.
Conduct unbecoming,
Yes.
any type of criminal charges, DUI.
Even little, they're pretty severe, I think, in most cases. So,
Much more so than in the standard players contract.
100%, yeah.
Okay. And do you find that this is picking up steam, or have the recent NFL cases getting people to shy away from celebrity endorsements?
You know, well, again, it depends on the city. Like, to me, if you're in Toronto, you're in Calgary, Montreal, those are good markets that you're going to get endorsement deals. Even Boston, or I think Chicago's pretty good too. But there's some areas where it doesn't matter. You're not going to get, you might get a local car dealer or something. But so for hockey, it's, you know, it's really restrictive to the where, you know, the market you're playing in. So.
Gil, how about you? The coaches hot for endorsements?
You know, I'm going to be honest with you, Brian. That's really not my area of expertise. My area of expertise is more in contract negotiations for the individual coaches and players. There are marketing agencies out there now in recruiting NFL football players, for instance, to play. When I go to the Senior Bowl or the Combine or places like that, not only are there agents there trying to get players to represent them like I do, now there are financial advisors there trying to become their financial advisor, and there are marketing companies there trying to be their marketing people. So rather than try and be all things to all people, I stick to what I think I do well, and that's contract negotiations. And have I done the odd marketing deal? I have, but it's not my strength, and I would rather refer that out to someone who specializes in that business.
Yeah, I did a couple of coaching contracts when I was practicing law, but I never had an endorsement deal.
Right.
They weren't around then.
Right.
Coaches weren't
Right.
utilized then for that. Neil, how about you?
Yeah, some of my clients do get endorsement deals. I am a marketer. I mean, that's my background, and 27 years large corporate has given me. I have a lot of contacts on the corporate side. So I have done endorsement deals for my coaches. They are not as rampant. First of all, we can have a long conversation, and Kevin can probably talk to this. I mean, NFL players, just by the size of the game and the size of the sport, typically those players see a lot more endorsement deals than hockey players do as a general rule. But that aside, typically, I'll give you an example. Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh, we did a deal with Chobani Yogurt, which went very, very well. The interesting approach there was it wasn't so much about selling more yogurt as it was leveraging Mike for his articulation and ability to speak about leadership. So more and more of my coaches are actually being hired to attend conferences and speak on leadership. So if you think of the difference between a player and a coach, a lot of the value that a coach adds is being in that leadership role. And the role of a coach is more about managing interpersonal relationships than the X's and O's. That's really the evolution that we have clearly seen. So there are restrictions in terms of some of the products. It's usually can't be anything that competes with the teams, any of the team sponsors. But typically for coaches, there's a lot of local stuff, car dealers, air conditioning companies. I mean, from my standpoint as a personal branding manager, which is really how I sell myself, I don't cringe at those things, but there has to be a connection point between the brand, the consumer brand, and the personal brand.
You didn't cringe that Sully's doing yogurt ads.
I didn't cringe at all.
I can't wait to call him later.
Oh yeah, and I think we did this a
He
couple
can't
of
even
years ago.
say it. He'd say yogurt.
Yeah. He's getting better though.
He's got a heavy Boston accent. He can't even say the product.
Mike is a fantastic speaker, and
he's amazing.
he's really he's college educated. Not to suggest that means a lot in this world, but he speaks really well. And of course, when you win back-to-back Stanley Cups, you have this instant credibility with a team that has a lot of egos. And that's where I try and leverage my guys for what they're really good at. Some of them are Gerard Gallant is an example in Vegas, doesn't like public speaking, loves being on panels, but that's okay. That's just his comfort zone. It doesn't make him a good or a bad person. But they're different opportunities, sitting on panels and answering questions versus standing up and trying to motivate an audience of 250 salespeople.
Darren, how about you? What's your rule of thumb? The first year, a guy doesn't do anything, get comfortable, depends on his production. What's your thinking generally on young players?
With regards to
Endorsements.
It's very hard for the younger. Like, as I said, in hockey, there's not a lot unless you're in a market like Toronto. Some of them, Mitch's case, think he was even getting them back when he was in junior. And to Gil's point, I do also farm out some of the marketing to an agency that helps me in that area to locate deals for players and so forth. But most of it's equipment deals, maybe trading cards. Those are even shrinking now. There's not so much out there.
And the NHLPA does a couple deals that the players are in a group license?
Yeah, they do. They do some deals for players. They're supposed to be spreading amongst them. But
That sounded like a cynical response. That was a really
well,
lukewarm answer.
you know what? I kind of feel that the players, probably the union's making money off of the players there. I prefer to be doing them than the union doing them.
Kevin, how about you? Do you cringe sometimes when you see your players doing commercials?
It's not so much what they endorse, but we write it in the contracts. We expect our players to, before they agree to endorse a product, if it's a direct competitor to one of our team sponsors, they have to speak to our business side, so they can let our sponsors know that those conversations are happening, and they can then decide if they want to get into the conversation or not. There's no right of first refusal, but they at least are made aware that the player is talking to their direct competitor, and then they can decide if they want to get into the bidding. But the only thing that makes us cringe really is when sometimes we'll have agents pushing players into doing too many little things, and especially in season, and it's time consuming. And there's a bit of it's not really a conflict of interest, but agents are making less and less off of player contracts because their percentages are going down so they can compete to get the players. They actually make a higher percentage on their endorsement deals. So they're motivated to get as many endorsement deals as possible, not really worrying about how they fit together in a player's brand or how it fits together with the player's playing schedule. And sometimes we have to remind them that their first job is to play football and their second job is to be a spokesperson.
Darren, what's a typical cut on an endorsement, or is it wide
20%,
open?
yeah, 20% is
20?
what, yeah,
So
15 to 20.
Your cut would be 15 to 20, whereas on a player contract, it's considerably lower.
Yes.
But obviously quite a bit more money, especially if it's Mitch Marner's deal.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. So what restrictions, what categories can a player not endorse in the NFL? Is hard liquor one they can endorse?
No, they can't do liquor. Tobacco products they cannot do. Anything else, I can't think of anything they... Cannabis they cannot yet anyways. Those are the only restrictions I can think of.
Erectile dysfunction?
Pretty sure they could if they wanted to.
Okay, so we're going to take it. How's our time? Good. Go ahead.
I got a question. How do you put a dollar value on the endorsement opportunity? Do you look at if it's just Toronto on the radio, it's a national broadcast deal on TV? How do you value it? Do you go to the sponsor first and see what their budget is, or do you have your own kind of rate card for each of your coaches?
Do you want me to answer? Or you want?
Sure, you start.
We have, internally we analyze their Twitter followers. There's a value to their social media, their attention rate, and then there's the market. It's just through years of experience, I guess you get to doing certain deals and you know the value. You're always trying to get the maximum for your client, but the endorser also has a budget that you try to work within, and it's kind of a touchy-feely thing, and then you figure it out that way.
I just to add to Darren's point, because I do sometimes get subcontracted out to work with agents on the marketing side.
Use the mic, Neil. Sorry.
I do sometimes get involved with endorsement deals with agents in other sports, just because of my corporate background. There's a little bit, Trevor, of market knowledge in terms of you can pick any number you want. Of course, there's a budget. You're trying to do what's best for both sides. But to me, the economic value is one thing. It's really the value to both sides. So it can't just, if you go into it as a money grab or as it's the wrong motivation. To me, there's got to be some sort of genuine connection between the brands, because otherwise, no endorser wants that either. Because buyers consumers can see through that. They can see when there's no.
Yeah, you take that into consideration when you're dealing with the player. Like, is it a good fit? How is the player, does he use the product? As the endorser doesn't want him using the product, or doesn't want to endorse him if he's not using the product.
But one real challenge, just to pick up on what I said earlier and what Darren said, with working with coaches, most of my coaches are not on social media, and I don't want them on social media. The Twitter trolls, you can't win being on Twitter. And there are a million examples.
TikTok. What's that? TikTok now.
Oh, TikTok. There are a million examples of people that get into trouble by over-engaging or whatnot. So from my standpoint, I manage the social media side for my clients to make sure that there is no trash talking or bashing or that kind of thing. And I do the same thing, and now that Brian's on the media side, he probably doesn't know this, but a couple of years ago I had a media guy who went after one of my coaches in a big way. And I took offense to that. I mean, and I was being inundated with messages saying, "Did John Hines really get fired in New Jersey? Why?" Because the headline of the piece was "John Hines is getting fired in New Jersey." Dash right with a question mark. And when you saw it on your phone, you didn't see the right. So I was inundated with calls. Of course, that wasn't true, but somebody needs to manage that, and the team doesn't always manage that because it's a performance-based business. And if the team is going to stand up for the coach and support him, they may have to fire him one day, and all that stuff works against them. So that's the value add in terms of, as managing the brand, as I said earlier. That's where that comes into play. But
Brian?
social media for coaches is a
You weren't
is a
here
problem.
this morning when I compared it to skydiving. The mishaps on social media are few and far between, but they're calamitous.
You talking to me? I wasn't here this morning, so I thought you were talking to him.
No, go ahead, Gil.
Huh?
One of the things you may find interesting that Neil and I have to deal with coaches is there is no template for a coach's contract. In other words, if I'm dealing with Kevin in the National Football League, there's a CBA, a collective bargaining agreement that has pretty much got a standard player contract that we all have to sign. Same with the NHLPA with hockey players, Mitch Marner. But in the coaching circles, when we do a deal, it's really important to understand the language in the contract because every club has a different law firm that's going to draft there. I've seen from a 2-page contract for an NHL head coach to a 45-page contract for an NHL head coach. And one of the most critical things we can do in assisting our coaches is really scrutinize the exit clause. In other words, the most important thing to me, other than negotiating the dollars of the contract, is what happens if he gets fired. What happens to his medical benefits, if it's a Canadian coach in the U.S. particularly, and his family's in the U.S., what happens to his medical benefits ongoing? What is the offset? If there is an offset, is there a buyout? Like all of those things. And there's no template. So there's no collective bargaining agreement between all the coaches. They don't have an association that has a collective bargaining agreement with all the NHL owners. So every contract is different. No two are the same unless you're dealing with the same club. And you've really got to scrutinize every jot and tittle of the contract to make sure your client is well protected.
Let me sound like the lawyer in the room, and I hate to say that, but do you get local counsel in Arizona to opine about the terms of the contract if you're doing a deal with the Coyotes?
I had one where I had to do that where it specifically mentioned state law. So I had to contact a lawyer in that state to see if there was anything I was missing in my mind on the state law, statutory, whatever, vacation pay and all this kind of stuff that it related to.
Every contract I signed had a choice of law clause in it.
Right.
So same thing with general managers, there's no template for that. It's not collectively bargained, but I did all my own deals till Toronto. I finally used a lawyer, but there's a choice of law clause in every one of them. So in Vancouver, this contract, any dispute should be governed by the laws of British Columbia.
Right.
Now, though, the league has taken really over all coaching disputes. Any dispute over the language in that contract you draft now goes to the National Hockey League.
Right.
So, and there was a period there where the league did not enforce the coaches' contracts. Gil, you might remember, Neil, you weren't around, but they would let these guys off the hook on some of these, and they don't anymore. They enforce them pretty rigidly now.
Very rigidly. And Gary Bettman is the judge and jury.
Yep.
But the one thing on that point, and I think to our credit, is Bill Daly is very supportive. As I said before, this whole idea of representation of coaches and GMs, other than these guys that have been around in this business a lot longer than I have, the league understands the benefit and understands the importance for coaches to have representation and assistant general managers and general managers. So to your point, there is a backstop.
The one of the ones you may find interesting, and I don't think I'm letting too much out of the bag here, but You might have found it interesting that Barry Trotz won the Stanley Cup and didn't stay with the Washington Capitals right after winning the Cup. Many people found that odd, and I represent Barry. So we had a 4-year deal with the Washington Capitals. They thought they could exercise something that I didn't think they could exercise to retain him at a very low number. After he signed, Mike Babcock had signed in Toronto. Mike Babcock signing with the Leafs escalated NHL coaching contracts significantly. And as I said, every contract is different because each club drafts it and then you have to make the changes you want to make. I found a funny little clause in the Washington contract that was called a Resignation Clause. And it said that he could, if he resigned at any time, they would owe him no more money. So we were 30 days from his contract being up, June 30th, and we'd heard what they wanted to pay him. Like, we'd had some preliminary discussions that were going nowhere. And we knew at that point there was only one other team that didn't have a coach in the National Hockey League, and that was the New York Islanders. So Barry chose to resign, invoked that resignation clause that they had put in the contract. Got in touch with Lou Lamoriello, and we started working on a deal. I met him in Dallas at the NHL draft. While I was meeting him in Dallas, meeting with Lou in his suite in the hotel, I had to inform him that another team had just rented a private plane and was flying to Seattle to meet with Barry. And they had to meet with him that day because they also wanted to hire him, but they had a coach. And they had to make a decision that night on whether or not to tell their coach to come to the draft the next morning, because they were going to fire him if they got Barry. So Barry and I were going back and forth till, I don't know, midnight, or Barry was now in BC. He was back in BC at his cottage. And he met with them in Seattle and flew up to BC. So late into the night, he had to make a decision. And his final decision was, I really can't say no to Lou. So we're going with the Islanders, so I was able to call Lou and tell him that. And then I had to tell the other club, which was difficult because they'd got on a private jet, flown all day to see him, then flown back to Dallas and met with me in Dallas that same night. So that coach didn't get fired. He's still coaching that club, and that club will remain nameless. But
Is he one of my guys?
but it's great when you have leverage. It's great when you do a deal with two clubs. When I did Bruce Boudreau with Minnesota, there was another club involved. And Bruce got fired one day, and a couple days later, more than doubled his salary when he went to Minnesota. And maybe that's going to have to happen again.
How's that
soon.
working out for him?
Yeah, well, maybe it's going to have to happen again soon. I don't know.
He's a great guy.
Yeah.
It's an old team.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and the whole having a second suitor, that's how Bilesman got his 5th year in Buffalo. They thought they were getting Babcock.
Right.
And when they said we lost Babcock, they said, well, we want you. He said, well, tack a year on.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's nice to have leverage. One last thing, the marketing people, Darren, talked at great length about, and sponsorship, about the value of continuity. Do you try to lock these deals up or have renewal clauses in them? Say with Apple, we'll use that as an example. Is there a continuation or renewal clause in that contract
Yes.
where Mitch could do this for 10 years?
Not for 10, but there
Or
is.
I mean, you might have to do another deal, but
Yeah.
say another 3-4 years?
I mean, we're working on one now with a financial institution that'll be 5 years. Originally started at a 2-year deal, but we've come to a point where it's a 5-year deal. In some cases, it depends on, again, the player. If he's doing this, you want to get maximum value, and he likes the product is another thing. You're not sure, or if he's unsure if he likes the product.
I'm pretty sure you can
long-term.
convince players to like products.
Yeah. But then, it really, then it's up to the player. Does he want to do it long? Does he want to be tied to him that long? Does he want shorter term?
And is it a menu that they have some personal appearances in there as
Yes.
well as screen time? And
Sometimes personal appearances, some guys don't want to do them, so maybe it's just social media. It might be, just a commercial. I know I did one a while back for Spezza with.
I'm sorry, the reason I'm being so picky is we got a lot of young people
No,
in here.
no
Just-
problem. I did one with Spezza back in with Saputo. Anton, you'll love that one. We did a milk to go, and that contract was for 1 year, and then there was an option for them to pick up a year. He didn't have to do any work. It just if they ran the commercial, he would be
Continued to run.
compensated. And yeah,
And so it's typically, when you do a commercial, it's got a run time specified, and if they want
Correct.
to go past it, they got to
Exactly.
pay additional.
Exactly.
And are any of Mitch's, are the Google ads national?
yes,
Okay, so right now, he might be the only player doing national ads in the NHL.
yes.
Okay, so back in the heyday, Gretzky did national ads. They ran coast to coast. Bobby Orr,
Yep.
he was a Ford. Bobby Orr was Chevy, and Gretz was Ford or whatever. Gretz did Ricoh cameras.
But with social media, it's going to be,
yeah.
it's hard to,
But right now, I think Mitch is the only guy that's got an ad running coast to coast in Canada.
yes,
One so far.
one, yeah.
Everyone else is local, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, how's our time, Carolyn?
10 minutes for questions.
Okay, questions, please.
So we got Tony, hockey fan. There you go. Sports fan. We hear a lot about advanced evaluation methodology in hockey operations or different sports operations. Can you talk to, does that really enter into, in two cases, how you guys negotiate the contract, and talking about what measures that you might agree on or look at, and on a second case, in the case of arbitration, looking at those different newer type measures.
Well, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, from our point of view, we don't use metrics a whole lot for contract structure or compensation, but we'll use it for comparable players, just like we would as an evaluative tool. Whether or not we introduce them in the negotiation kind of depends on what those metrics are and who we're speaking to, because if it doesn't resonate with the other side of the table, that really doesn't bring any value to the conversation. So more than anything is used for us to help us identify where the proper spot in the market is. If we think it can help with the conversation with the agent, then we'll introduce it, but that's a case by case.
You gotta stop getting so worked up at these things. Next question.
But on the NFL coaching front, there are salary grids by position, by coaching position. So it's not a metric, but it is a guideline, based on number of years coached and team affordability and all that kind of stuff. So we don't see that in hockey.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, David Chung from UMass Amherst. This past summer in the NHL, we've seen a trend of younger players signing short-term contracts. Some of them, in the case of Matthew Tkachuk and Timo Myers, they have a very inflated last year value, where the qualifying offer is very difficult for the cap-restricted team. So do you see this trend continuing in future years, and how will this impact how a general manager runs his team?
Yeah, I think it is a trend that's going to continue.
Darren.
Sorry, I think it's a trend that will continue or should continue anyway. You can maximize, the earning potential for the player, and at the end of that deal, they've got to qualify them at that higher number. So, they can go to arbitration for a cut of up to 15% if they wanted, if it wasn't a number that they liked, or they can let them go at that point.
And I think Timo Myers is really the one that's going to be
Yes.
interesting, because his QO is 10.
Yeah.
So he did a 4-year bridge deal. His qualifying
Or 9.
offer is 10, right?
10 or 9, or 9, I think it is. I think it's 9, Timo
Is it
Myers.
9?
Yeah. Is it
I
10?
think it's 10.
Okay.
Anyway,
Yeah.
10 wins.
Higher.
Yeah.
either way,
Yeah.
they'll have to make a decision at that point. If he continues to improve, and he's had a slow start,
Yeah.
but if he continues to improve like we all think he will, they'll just qualify him at 10, and then he's got arb rights,
Right.
I think. Yeah, he would.
Yeah.
So I think you're going to see more of it too, just because teams are not going to do Mitch Marner type level deals. They want the lower salaries so they can work with a cap, and then if they got a big QO and they got to pay him at the end, they're going to pay him at the end.
Thank you.
What else? Trev?
What do you guys do if you have two coaches, both unemployed, similar pedigree, both looking for the same job at the same time?
Oh, I like this.
I had that
You're
this
going to
year.
see some tap dancing right now.
I had that this year with one of the coaching openings, where I had 2 candidates interview for the same job. And I told both of the guys, I said, my job is to get you in front of them. My job is to get you the interview. And they both interviewed with the general manager, both thought they had great interviews. But I said, I'm not making the decision as who's going to hire the head coach. You've got to impress them, and whoever wins the day, but I can't influence that decision. And so they both agreed with me that was okay, and they were good with it. So
One get hired.
no, actually one didn't.
That might be maybe easier to deal with.
Probably.
One gets hired, the other guy's pissed.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't think you fought hard enough for him.
Yeah.
Neil, what's your thought?
I've actually had a situation where I had 3 candidates for one job. Sorry, Gil. No, It's a great question. It's a question that I get asked. I'm sure Gil gets asked this question all the time as well. Is like, you have so many clients, so how are you going to represent me better than the next guy? And the true answer is, as I said before, as I alluded to you before, my business model is based on personal branding. So each candidate is their own distinctive personal brand. The example I use as a former automotive guy for a long time is that no two used cars are the same. Right? So each candidate brings a set of attributes to the job. My job is to prepare each one of them independently. I will never share information about candidate A with B or C, and they know that. But they will all be prepared independently. I will answer all their questions separately. And it's not may the best man win, but there's an element of trust in this that, and to Gil's point, I have never been asked by a general manager which candidate he should hire. First of all, I don't think that's a fair question, and they're too smart. And all my job is to make sure that each one of my candidates is the perfect fit for what they're looking for. At that point in time, the decision is out of my hands. So, in the case where I had the three, all three of them didn't get the job.
You guys suck at this.
Yeah, we're over 5.
I guess, yeah. Small sample size, but yeah, I guess so. But there are a lot of uncontrollables in these decisions, and Brian would know this firsthand. I mean, there's a lot of nepotism. There's a lot of comfort, sticking with who you know. And as good as people are, and there are a lot of great hockey coaches out there, as far as I'm concerned, the best guy doesn't always win.
And I can tell you that oftentimes the pick that the general manager wants to be the head coach doesn't get the job, because he ultimately reports to an owner, and if someone has schmoozed the owner over the general manager's head, that can come into play as well.
That happens for sure. It never happened to me. I would not, if the owner...
No, you got two hands on the wheel, right?
Yeah, the owner said, I want this guy to coach. I said, well,
Yeah.
you don't need me.
Yeah.
So that never happened, but it does happen for
It
sure.
absolutely happens.
Yeah.
I agree. Okay, let's take one more, and then I think we're done.
I just think it would be beneficial if, Kevin, you could talk about like the contract restructuring in the NFL and how it affects the cap.
You know what? I had that on my notes. I swear to
Thanks,
God.
Brian.
Could you give us a little bit? Because we don't do that in hockey.
So if you want to create cap room, our contracts, which are not fully guaranteed, if you're at a point in time in the term of the contract where there's salary owed to the player, but it's not guaranteed, you can guarantee it in the current year, and that money will now amortize over the duration remaining on the contract. So you can, if he's got a $4 million salary this year and 3 years remaining, you guarantee $3 million, you've created $2 million of cap room in the current year.
Got it? That makes sense, everyone, or want it again? Let's do it again.
So if you guarantee...
So I'm making $4 million.
Yep,
It's not guaranteed.
right.
But you want to get me some money, but get some cap space. How do we restructure it?
So it's as simple, we actually have language in our contracts that if we ask, the player has to do it, so it's not a negotiation. And the
So
language...
Tom Brady's not a hero for doing this?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. And ultimately, it really doesn't affect the player whatsoever. I mean, in season, a veteran player, his salary is technically, it's not guaranteed, but they'd be owed termination pay if you fired them anyways, so they're not going to lose a penny no matter what happens. But if you guarantee that salary, what you guarantee will prorate over the remaining years, and that money that prorates into future years obviously comes off of your salary cap in the current year, which is where you create the cap room.
Okay,
So
perfect.
we agents love to get those calls from the team saying, we'd like to renegotiate and guarantee the money.
Yeah. Okay, well, gentlemen, thank you. I really appreciate it very much.